Hello, I'm Robin Worley, welcome to Lenscraft. Today I'm looking at Colour Efex Pro, which is one of my favourite tools in the Nik Collection by DxO. In this video I'll be sharing a selection of tips that could help you use the software more effectively. You may already know some of these, but I'm sure there'll be something new for many Nik Collection users. The first tip is something that's simple that a lot of people don't realise is possible. Let's say that I want to use the Pro Contrast filter to neutralise the colour of the sky in a photo. When I move the correct colour cast slider over to the right, it fixes the sky, but it also changes the foreground. To prevent this happening, I can add a negative control point to the foreground to protect that area from the filter adjustment. Now let's also imagine that I want to increase the contrast of the foreground using the same filter. Unfortunately, when I make the adjustment, it affects the sky and not the foreground because I've applied control points. The simple solution, and something that many people don't realise you can do, is to add another Pro Contrast filter. Now I can use the contrast sliders to adjust the foreground. I'll then limit this adjustment to the ground using control points. The important point to understand is that you can continue to add multiple filters of the same type to an image. Now let's look at a button that's also often overlooked. You'll find this at the bottom of the history panel. Let's imagine that I'm editing a series of similar images and I want to apply the same settings to this image as I did to the last one I edited. One way I can do this quickly is to save my filter combination as a recipe. I can then apply the recipe to each of the images as I edit them. But if I edit my first image and I forget to save the recipe, I can use this button to reapply the filters to the new image. When I click the button, the current filters are replaced by the filters I applied to my previous image. Now I can save the filters as a recipe for further use by clicking the Save button. Whilst we're in the history panel, let's look at another tip to help us compare history states when editing an image. As I've been making changes to this image, you can see the adjustments building up in the history list. If I click one of the entries in the list, the preview displays that point in my editing history. Now watch what happens when I switch to the split screen preview mode. The preview now shows the original image on the left and the selected point in the history list on the right. But something else has also happened. We now have a small orange pointer at the top left of the list. I can use this pointer to control the history state of the left side of the image. By clicking and dragging it down the list, I can pick another point to use for the comparison. This allows me to control the history state for both the left and right sides of the image. The only limitation is that the left side of the image needs to be earlier in the history than the right side. If I click on an earlier point in the list, the pointer also moves back to that position. Now let's go back to the filters and look at another feature that's often overlooked, which is the filter presets. Let's imagine that I want to add a graduated fog filter to this image because I want the fog to appear stronger. The usual way to do this is by adding a new empty filter and then clicking on the filter in the filter library. But notice the icon to the right of the filter when I hover my mouse over it in the list. When I click this icon, I can see a series of thumbnails. These thumbnails are presets, and when I click one of them, it applies those settings to my filter. All of the filters in Colour Efex Pro come with these presets that you can use. Now notice these up and down arrows at the top. I can use these to move up and down the list of filters whilst viewing the different presets. This is a great way to find interesting filters and effects that work together but which you might not have thought of. Each time I move to a new filter, the thumbnails preview how that preset looks when applied to my image. Let's now move on and look at how control points behave in Colour Efex Pro, as it's different to some of the other Nik plugins. I'll start by adding a Polaroid transfer effect to the image because it's quite strong and it's easy to see. I'll then expand the control point section of the filter, which reveals an opacity slider. By default, the filter opacity is set to 100%, but you can use this slider to change it. As I reduce the slider, it fades the effect without needing to make any further adjustments to the filter settings. This is extremely useful, but it also works in conjunction with the control points. Watch what happens when I add a positive control point. If you're not familiar with the color effect control points, this is how you control where the filter is applied to an image. When you use a plus control point, it applies the filter effect to that area. If I add a control point to the sky, I'm selecting that area. Now if you want to see what's being selected by a control point, click the View Mask option in the control point list. The area in white is what the control point has selected and where the filter is being applied. Now also look at what's happened to the opacity slider. It's been set to 0, which is hiding the filter effect from the rest of the image. But supposing we want the lower strength of the filter to apply everywhere, but the filter to apply at full strength where the control point is. All we need to do is increase the opacity slider. And if I move the opacity slider back to 100%, the filter is applied everywhere even though I have a control point on the image. As well as having the global opacity slider for the filter, each control point also has its own opacity slider. We can use these to control the strength of the filter effect in the area selected by the control point. If I move the control point opacity slider to 0, it removes the filter effect from that area. This is just like adding a negative control point. Something else that's often overlooked when people use control points is that you can synchronize the control points. When I click and drag with my mouse, I can select multiple control points together. Now when I move the opacity slider for one of the control points, all the selected control points are also adjusted. If I don't want to keep having to select all the control points when I do this, I can group them together by clicking the Group button below the control point list. Then I only need to select the group to be able to adjust the opacity of all the control points in that group. Now something else that's often missed is that despite the control points being grouped, I can still move each one independently. And I can also resize those individual control points whilst all the time they stay in my group. Combining control points like this and using them with the filter's global opacity slider gives a huge amount of control. The final tip I'm going to share is that you can copy control points between different filters. First, I select a control point or points to copy from the filter by clicking them in the list. I can then select the Copy Control Point option in the pop-up menu at the top of the filter. Now I can go to one of the other filters and with the same pop-up menu paste the control points. I can continue to do this, applying the control points to each of the filters. I hope you found it interesting and picked up at least a couple of new tips and ideas for working with Nik Color Efex Pro. If you like this video and want to see more tips in the future, let me know your thoughts in the YouTube video comments. I'm Robin Whalley, you've been watching Lenscraft. I'll see you soon for another video.